Paul.
Hey.
You had us
Good morning,
worried
Scott.
there. You had us worried there, Paul. Good morning.
You had me worried.
Uh-oh. We'll figure it out later. Well, you're here now. Welcome. So glad to have you. Thank you for joining us, Paul.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm delighted. I actually wish I were with you. I was a little irritated that I was sent a text last night from the bar showing a fabulous sunset, making me feel even worse for not being able to attend in person.
Well, we'll be here next year, and we look forward to having you next year, Paul. I'm just grateful that we have you this morning. We're going to jump right into it. Here we are. We just kicked off the event. We're here in Laguna. We've got folks spread out throughout the property. We've got a packed room here in Track 1. We've got hundreds of attendees from around the world that are tuned in, and we're all connected to the medtech ecosystem. We're all wondering what's going on, where's it headed, and we're all thrilled just to be back together. So I thought we just started out with, give us your view at a high level. What's the current environment like? Talk about investment dynamics, high level, where are things headed, and then we can kind of jump in from there.
Yeah, well, I think your meeting is probably a pretty good proxy for the marketplace. It's been an active time, but it's been harder to assess, right? Because a lot of folks have been hunkered down. I get the sense, frankly, that the market is very active. You can tell that by public market comps. Companies are trading at all-time highs. There's been an active IPO class. There's an active IPO pipeline. Our strategics in this space are healthy and recovering. It's been a very challenging year without a doubt, but actually in many cases, I sense the medtech ecosystem writ large, whether from an investor perspective or a commercial or a hospital metrics perspective, is actually faring pretty well. Most companies are recovered now from year-over-year comps as they cycle through second quarter comparisons, where, of course, we were in the face of the storm a year ago, April and May. And I would say the venture world is very active and strategics are healthy. So I feel pretty good about where we are.
So we'll talk a little bit about the Medtech Convergence Fund, but can you elaborate a little bit more on maybe the Spac dynamic, the IPO markets, you think the Spac dynamic is a short-time thing, long-term? Talk to us a little bit about that, because I know there's a lot of buzz here at the event about it, and we're going to have a panel tomorrow to dive into it, but I'd love to hear your view on things.
Yeah, well, I think it's here to stay. I think it's legit. It's been greatly overhyped in a lot of ways. And that's a function both of some of the newsworthy SPACs that have been raised, and really the total amount of capital that has been, I'll say, pledged, air quotes, because a lot of that capital is not permanent, as you all know, and can be redeemed in the de-SPACing process. But I do think it's been, in some ways, helpful for medtech. I think there's a category of companies that could be viable to merge with a SPAC and go public that might have otherwise fallen perhaps a little bit below the classic threshold of IPO criteria. And as a result of that, we probably have more aggregate companies capable of going public, the combination of IPO and SPAC, than we would have had by IPO in and of itself. I think a lot of the SPACs, frankly, have drawn, I'd say there's a correlation between SPAC newsworthiness and size, right? But some of the larger SPACs are probably too large for many of the data points that we would say would be the best fit for medtech. So I'm expecting what you'll see over time is that there will be some smaller SPACs raised that are more focused on the size that might be more appropriate for medtech. Overall, though, I think it's a healthy dynamic. I think it is likely to persist, but it has been exponential in its growth in the last 6 to 9 months, and I think that will cool down considerably. The marketplace for SPAC pipes is overheated. It's creating a kind of a clogged effect amongst institutional investors. So there's some downside to the hyperactivity, but I do think when it settles in, it will be a healthy adjunct to the public market dynamic.
Very interesting. So, Paul, you've sat, many of us here have followed your career. You've been around forever. You've sat on all sides of the table, big strategics, sit on the boards of early stage companies, and now you have your funds. Most recently, the Medtech Convergence Fund. Talk to us a little bit about the fund and the emphasis of where you're investing in the stage of company and also the technologies that are of key interest for you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I have been around the block a few times. It's an interesting time, honestly. If you go back 10, 15 years, medtech investing has been through some very challenging cycles. And that's happened at a time when medtech as a category has continuously expanded. Medtech strategics have become larger. More companies have grown into that billion-dollar plus category and become mini strategics themselves. So there's been a kind of a counter-cyclical nature to medtech venture. And I think there's been much written about that, of course, as it relates to funds that were too large, returns that were too low, holding times that were too long, risks that were too compounding. And so where we are today, I think, is having seen that correction, and I don't know when that correction started and exactly when it ended, but certainly there's been a cycling out of medtech in some ways, and I think there's been a stabilization, perhaps a new floor level of how much capital might be available. And we've tried to put a fund together that addresses that timing, that opportunity. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, and so the Medtech Convergence Fund was closed officially, final close of just over a year ago. It's a fund that is focused explicitly on early stage medtech. We're trying to take advantage of what we call the convergence of technologies, communications technologies, sensors, battery life, technologies that allow for therapies to be dislocated away from the site of care, the surgery center, the hospital, and closer to the home, and technologies that may not fit the old model, if you will, of medtech. Let's say a next generation mitral valve repair system that would take 7 years to get through preclinicals and clinicals and follow-up and PMA. Those are the kinds of devices that have struggled to generate returns. So the Medtech Convergence Fund is aiming at a different target, one that we think will have shorter holding times and lower aggregate risk.
So are traditional device investments something you guys are going to look at in this fund, or are you not so focused in traditional stuff?
Well, we will definitely look at traditional investments, but I would say they have to have relatively low hurdles. We have some in the pipeline now that I would say are classic medical devices, including some interventional devices. But our primary focus is going to be on connected devices that are less to non-invasive and that are capable of dislocating the site of care closer to the home.
Okay. Talk to us a little bit about current investments. I think we have one of your portfolio companies here at the event. Would love to know a little bit more about EBT and anything else that you have that's current.
Yeah, well, EBT is a great example. I think it's a prototype for our fund. It's targeting a very large market. We know overactive bladder, as an example, certainly has been very successfully described by Axonics, and of course Medtronic created that as one of its many market development initiatives from its original pacemaker platform with the InterStim platform. It's an underserved market, probably single-digit penetration, and so many patients looking for an alternative with comparable efficacy to what they can receive with an implant, but without that complexity, with a lower interventional threshold, if you will. So EBT has a very novel nerve target, one that is proprietary. I think it's very unusual in neuromodulation to be able to covet a proprietary nerve. EBT is targeting the saphenous nerve with, at least initially and perhaps permanently, a non-invasive transcutaneous stimulation platform And it's a very exciting opportunity, and one I think that is emblematic of the kind of investing that we'll do with MCF. We have a second company. We've made 4 investments so far. We have a second company called Zyrigo Health, which is again, a home therapy, in this case, phototherapy, using narrowband UVB light to treat skin conditions like psoriasis. You cannot obviously turn on a news program or a sports program without seeing a commercial for an autoimmune biologic to treat psoriasis. It's become the fastest growing category of specialty pharma. It's breaking the budgets of self-insured employers. And so we think there's a massive opportunity to use a previously established therapeutic option, phototherapy, in the home for this condition that's very, very significant, life-altering, but for which drug spending has become really unbearable. And so Zyrigo is a very interesting example of the kind of technology that the Medtech Convergence Fund is looking for.
I know that Greg's here, and he'll be sit on a panel later today or tomorrow, I believe. And I've got about 170 founders and CEOs here that want to know if you guys will be pulling an investment or two out of this meeting.
Well, we will. We're there for a reason, right? And we
not to put you on the spot or anything.
Yeah, well, we see new deals every day, and Greg is there, as is our venture partner Alan May, for that very reason, to meet with entrepreneurs, to find out what's our next deal. This is how we populate our pipeline. We meet with entrepreneurs. We're looking for ideas that are big, that have large market potential. We're looking for entrepreneurs that really can build a great story, build a great culture, build a great team. And we are early stage investors. So we may or may not pull an investment out of the meeting, but I guarantee you we will have some very interesting meetings, and we will have some follow-up. There will be some deals that make it into our pipeline out of this session.
Okay, well, we're gonna monitor closely. So along these lines, and we ask this question a lot, but I'd just love to hear your answer on this. For founders and CEOs that don't have you in their network, they don't have you guys in there, what's the best, how do they get in touch with you? Is it doing stuff like this? Is it, what's the best way to get through to a venture fund that you just don't have access to, but you feel like you have an opportunity that is in line with their stated goals?
Well, venture investing doesn't always go along with being secretive, right? We try to be pretty easy to reach, pretty easy to access, pretty easy to contact. Certainly in this time of COVID, we haven't attended a lot of meetings in person, but honestly, Greg is there. I would have been there, but for logistics. We try to be easy to reach. Email, LinkedIn, send us a note by one means or another, and send us a deck, and we will take a look, and we will get back to you. That's the business that we're in. We work hard. We screen everything that comes our way, and we will get back to you one way or the other. So just reach out. Okay, so shifting gears just a little bit, and in the prep for this interview, I spoke to many people who have either worked with you or worked for you over the years, and a couple things came out crystal clear when they talked about you and described you. Smart, tough, can be really tough, but one of the nicest guys ever. So how have you figured out, in your career, Paul, how have you figured out how to balance getting stuff done, being tough, but you still walk away with this nice guy legacy? And maybe there's some war stories in there that I just don't know about. Maybe you're not a nice guy to everybody, but how have you balanced this over your career? Well, I don't really worry about legacy, right? So I am what I am. People can think of me what they will. I have been doing this for 40 years. I don't know if I'm tough. I really don't think of myself that way. I do think of myself as disciplined. I do think of myself as principled. And, in business, we have to make tough decisions. We have to make decisions that don't necessarily feel good to everybody. And I consider that it's a responsibility I take. I've always been a responsible person. And my sense of responsibility probably drives me to accept the hard challenge and maybe deliver the tough message, maybe ask the poignant question, maybe tell somebody something that they don't want to hear. I've always viewed that individuals would much rather hear the truth than to be told a nicety that in the end misleads them into misunderstanding where they actually really stand. So I approach business and managing through that sense of responsibility, through that sense of discipline, through that sense of principle. If that is perceived as toughness, so be it. That's not my intent. The other, I think the real guiding light here is that you do want to treat other people the way you would want to be treated. And I think if there's a method to my madness, it is that. I try to, if somebody needs to hear something that is a challenging deliverable, then number one, sign up to do it yourself. You have to do it in person. And number two, convey it in a way that is professional and the way you would want to receive it yourself. That's true with everything I do in follow-up, whether it's a good message or a bad message. Send the message with some context, invest the time, don't hide from difficult circumstances, take things head on, and yet stay disciplined because not every opportunity fits with every person.
Well, that's great advice. So, Paul, with all the success you've had, we all learn from our mistakes. Is there one maybe big setback or disappointment that you can recall in your career that was maybe painful at the time, but that you learned from? Because I know everybody's here looking to grow, and I'm going to ask you for some advice towards the end here. But what's a setback you can recall that really helped you in some other ways in the long term?
Well, setbacks, I think, occur every day. And the more active you are in business, the more setbacks you have. And frankly, I've had so many setbacks, you can't even enumerate them. I think the biggest mistakes I have made over time, and we've all heard this from managers with experience, the biggest mistakes for me are people mistakes, where I stayed too long, perhaps with the wrong team, or indecisiveness. There's a fair amount when we all would admit that decisions that we sometimes reach, we finally get there, maybe we put them off somehow, and when we pull the trigger, regardless of the nature of the decision, we often look at it and say, well, we probably waited too long. So I would say in the end, it's about people. It's about aligning management with the job and ultimately being decisive and trying to avoid that feeling of regret where in retrospect, you admit to yourself, I probably should have made a decision earlier. But the most important thing from my perspective is, I certainly don't have a sense of having achieved that much. I don't think I've ever done anything by myself. I'm an executive. I've never invented a product. I don't sell very much. I don't make anything. I personally am just a member of a team, no matter what I'm involved in. So I don't try to accept much responsibility for success. And if I can err on the side, I'd much rather accept blame for a failure than accolades for a success.
That's great. Okay, so any advice for the CEOs and founders that are here? It's not easy being an entrepreneur on its own, but especially at times like this. And so, any advice or inspiration for our innovators that are here, that are out building for us?
Well, number one, you inspire me. I don't know if that's inspirational, but this is where it all happens, where you have an idea, you have an entrepreneur, you have somebody who's willing to take a risk and make something happen, someone who can assemble their passion and their energy and their conviction behind an idea and push it forward. That's how this whole industry got started. That's how dating back to my earliest days, that's how Andreas Grunzig first opened a balloon in a coronary artery and created the field of interventional cardiology. I've seen it 100 times. So that's what you should all be aspiring to do. We all take it on the chin, right? It's hard. You have to raise capital. You struggle. You worry. You sweat it out. So you just have to understand that that's part and parcel with the mission that you're on. Don't lose hope as a result of that. On the other hand, I hear the phrase, don't take no for an answer. I think that's fair, but listen to the feedback that you get. In the no, in the rejection, there are reasons why. So take that in, assimilate that, factor it into your thoughts. Try to understand not that you received a no, but why. What was the basis? What can I take away from this rejection and factor into my business plans, factor into my value proposition so that I can better tune what I'm offering the marketplace so that it is better received the next time around. So listen, don't take no literally, take it as a vector of feedback, try to factor it into what you're doing next, make modifications, listen, be responsive to that feedback, and persist. It's true, and if anything, I'm an example of this. Success is 90% about showing up. Just keep at it.
I love that. Suit up and show up. Okay, so let's look out in the future now, Paul. From a, I guess from a tech standpoint, you talked to us about what excites you. Long term, where do you see our industry 5-10 years? What excites you? Where can we be in 5-10 years? What do you see way out on the horizon?
Well, I think, as we say, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. I think medtech is a big part of the solution going forward. We still have this daunting problem with healthcare expenditures. Obviously, a continuously increasing part of our budget in the United States. We have access and equality access problems around the world and across our healthcare system. We're spending too much on care that could be avoided. We're certainly not cost effective as a healthcare delivery system. So when I think about where we'll be in 5 years, we should be better. We should be more efficient. We should have more technologies available and accessible. So then you say, okay, what might that look like? Data, we all know about big data. We all know about I'll call it the instrumentation of everything we do. I think there will be a phenomenal explosion in data collection and then the ability to factor that data into medical decision-making, earlier interventions, clearer diagnoses, and ultimately, maybe the second wave would be a shift in, call it the interventional tipping point. Right now, we're so ready to postpone a diagnosis because we don't want to hear it, or get on a drug and stay on that drug because we don't want to have a procedure because of the risk-benefit ratio. And I'd like to see that risk-benefit ratio continuously move in the favor of benefit for medtech. So I think medtech plays a major role ultimately in diagnosing and enabling early intervention. And then obviously beyond that, you have what the Medtech Convergence Fund is focused on, which is the dislocation of care. How do we do more things more efficiently outside of that site of most intensive resource utilization in the hospital? We learned through the pandemic that patients don't want to be there. We learned through the pandemic that physicians would prefer not to have to see every patient inside of a healthcare facility. So finding a way to take virtual healthcare delivery, telemedicine, in all of its various definitions and proliferate that. And then lastly, I would like to think that we'll see prevention. And it may be hard to make money with prevention, but we spend too much of our scarce healthcare resources on disease that can be prevented. That's got to be part of our solution. May not be part of the medtech value proposition, but that's got to be part of the solution in overall balancing of the resource delivery and what we get out of it. Across that spectrum has to be payment reform. We're continuously trying to find a way for payment mechanisms to catch up to innovation. We turn down ideas at the Medtech Convergence Fund all the time that look as if they could be better solutions, but where we can't see a clear pathway through an arcane reimbursement process to funding, to just making it easy for hospitals or physicians to use it, or to find the same remuneration in home delivery as we might find in hospital delivery of a therapy. So ultimately, for us to see the most effective care delivery, we have to see payment reform and payment adaptability that has historically not been the case.
Well, that's great. A great vision. So Paul, I'm going to open it up to some rapid fire Q&A. I think somebody's serving up some questions to my cell phone here. We're going to see if we can pull this off. But if there's anybody, I'm sure there's got to be somebody here that has a question for Paul. You can stand, and I'll try and transfer the question over to Paul. Who's first? The floor is open. Please. Reimbursement for home products, are you seeing any movement?
Are you seeing, I mean, there have been some openings with monitoring and whatnot where they've been establishing reimbursement codes. Are you seeing any more of that and more movement in that direction? Or is it just sort of a stall?
Did you get that, Paul?
I think so.
Okay. I'm going to, Paul, let's pause for a second. Maybe, guys, from a tech standpoint, we can get a mic that we can pass around, and then we'll let Paul jump on that one. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, home care is challenging, right? Commonly, we would find ourselves falling into maybe a DME category with a one-time purchase. More recently, of course, we've seen the RPM codes, the remote patient monitoring codes, which provide for a baseline level of payment. We're seeing more now, I'd say, in especially in the employer funded world. Of course, employers ultimately pay for most non-Medicare healthcare costs. Employers are stepping in because they're taking more control and exerting more influence over the cost effectiveness of the therapies available to their employee bases. So there are ways to get sort of non-systemic payments. Now, payments not coming necessarily from a payer per se, but through alternative sources. I would say this is the great gap in our technology cycle, is ultimately how to close the loop on payment so that it's facilitated, it's available, and it's not a binary impediment to technology advance. I think, of course, the breakthrough designation, the payment systems that are supposed to go into effect, I think May the 15th, are likely to be delayed again. There are folks in Washington working on improvements to the system. They're not here yet, but I guess I'd say I'm hopeful that we'll see some progress in this direction over the next 3 to 5 years. But as of today, it remains a systemic flaw and a real hurdle to innovation.
Any other questions? Okay, while we're up, we got a question, please.
Could you give us some more color on the non-systemic payment methods for employers?
More color on the non-systemic payment methods.
Yeah, well, I have an example in my portfolio now. I mentioned Xarigo, which is a psoriasis therapy, and employers are finding their specialty pharma budgets exploding because of the autoimmune biologic spend. That is currently focused on psoriasis patients, as an example today, with moderate to severe psoriasis. There's a movement afoot to move that down to the mild psoriasis category, which would increase the market 5-fold, and then to even spill that over into other conditions like eczema. So payers are looking at employers are looking at that problem and saying, what can we do to offer programs to our employees so that we can put them on a different form of therapy, and ultimately we'll call it step therapy, force employees to go through more cost-effective alternatives before they ultimately default to the most expensive option. So employers are getting involved because they realize it's their benefit that is ultimately being increased so dramatically by the lack of payment methods. And frankly, at that point, when patients default to a drug and when that drug is more expensive and ultimately budget breaking, the employers are mobilizing, and they're working with their insurance partners and their pharmacy benefit managers to try to curtail excessive cost increase. So I think we're going to see more and more of that in the future.
Very good. Another follow-up?
So thanks. Yeah, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, I think May 3rd, about the challenge for employers having so many new solutions being presented to them of cost savings. I wondered if you had an opinion on which of the aggregators that us startups with solutions should actually consider going to as well as going to the employers direct.
Well, I think the first thing you should do is try to generate data. In the end, employers, you're right, they don't want to become healthcare providers per se. They are clearinghouses for evidence about various programs and ultimately about costs. And they look at their membership, they look at their employee base on a per member per month basis, as you would expect a payer to do. So I think the most important thing for an innovator to do, for an entrepreneur to do, is think about the value of your solution in the same terms that an employer would. Employers are unlikely to be approached one-off. They're likely to be approached through clearinghouses that ultimately are aggregating for them members, right? So large employers become a member of a payer. It could be a large organization like Aetna and CVS. It could be smaller organizations, but that's how you ultimately reach employers, is through plan providers for them. And you need to talk to them in their language, which is, how do we reduce your exposure on healthcare costs on a per member per month basis?
Questions? I think we have one over here.
Yeah, you mentioned the breakthrough device reimbursement, that whole battle. Can you just talk a little bit more about what you see coming down the pipe as it relates to reimbursement for breakthrough devices?
Scott, I couldn't quite hear everything about that other than that it relates to breakthrough device designation.
Can you restate your question?
Yeah, just you mentioned that the reimbursement for breakthrough devices. Hold on.
We got a mic coming. We're working the kinks out.
Well, this is exactly what.
Sorry, I got a mic. You mentioned that they had delayed, right, this reimbursement program for breakthrough devices, and you expect them to delay it again in a couple of days. And so I was just wondering if you could provide any more thoughts or color about what you anticipate in the near term, and then maybe in the more, next 3 to 6 months.
Well, yeah. So first of all, I think it's a great concept. It's overdue. FDA and CMS working together on this breakthrough designation concept, trying to really accelerate technology availability in the market and ultimately close the gap that we all know exists between FDA approval and then some form of payment access. They took it upon themselves to say, let's decide of a technology characterization, technology category that we think has the chance to shift the curve. And they've obviously described that as breakthrough. I'd say, if anything, I'm a little disappointed at the number of breakthrough designations that have been made available, because it is now in the hundreds. It seems to be flowing perhaps a little bit too liberally. And I think the rapidity with which breakthrough designations have been named has created a consternation on the payer side, at the CMS side, when they think about, okay, all of these technologies in the pipeline, they're going to start hitting with their final approvals in 1, 2, and 3 years. That could be hundreds of new of technology categories that we're going to have to provide coverage for, and we don't necessarily have a good mechanism for that, or frankly, even a good means by which to estimate what that might expose us to for costs. So there typically, with an interagency solution like this, there are gaps. They haven't been engineered through. That's exactly why the delays are currently taking place. So I think I would rather see them delay it and put some workable solutions in place, whether they're available 30 or 60 or 90 days from now, rather than look at the overall program and say it's too complex, it's potentially too costly, therefore let's pull the plug on it. So exactly what form it will come, I don't know, because it is not known, but I do believe that the goal is very laudable, which is to say let's provide coverage upon approval, and then move into a mode not dissimilar to, let's say, coverage under evidence development, where post-market evidence is generated, cost-effectiveness evidence is generated, and then we can have a seamless bridge, a seamless handoff between the intermediate coverage and long-term coverage. Right now, that's a gap that is dry, right? That's the dry well that we're in. And to the extent that that can be filled with an intermediate program, even if it is for only those with a breakthrough designation, I think that would be exceptionally valuable to the medtech innovation community.
All right. I think we have time for one more question, and then I have a wrap-up question for Paul. If anybody has anything they want to... Okay.
Hey, Paul.
Yep, here we go.
So over the last many years, innovation has been largely, in medtech at least, has been largely a US story with a few exceptions, and most of the large multinationals are based in the US. On the pharma side, we've seen maybe a little more innovation coming from across the world and accumulating recently with vaccines, coming from China, from other markets. Do you see a similar trend in medtech? Do you expect maybe more innovation coming from these emerging markets?
No, I don't necessarily see that, and I say that with all due respect, to different markets where, of course, different ideas have emerged. Israel is a very notable exception, relatively small, but very innovative, a lot of IP, a lot of high-tech solutions come out of Israel. I would say, the European marketplace in general is more innovative on the clinical side than it may be on the corporate side. When I think about the first TAVR, the first interventional procedures in many areas, they've actually come out of the European clinical setting. So I think there's, what that tells us is that there's equal innovation potential, but the US marketplace tends to align the resources necessary in the form of early stage CEOs, in the form of medtech engineering, in the form of strategics, in the form of ultimately closeness to the highest regulatory bar, I think, and the highest market value. Most companies realize you're going to have to prove yourself US market ready in order to maximize your value. So the ecosystem developing early stage companies tends to be most prolific in the US, honestly, based on the number of factors that have to align in order for that to be successful. I don't think that's likely to spontaneously emerge in other markets. So I think it's going to remain US-centric. That's not necessarily good, but I think that's practical. That's the way it's likely to be.
All right. Thank you. Okay, Paul, we're coming up on time. We talked a lot of, thank you so much. We talked a lot about investing. We talked about various subjects. One area we didn't talk much about, I'd like to get your final thoughts, but also we didn't talk about the deals market, M&A market, quite a bit. So what's your forecast for M&A over the course of the next year? And give us your final thoughts. We got a room full of folks that would love to hear your final thoughts as we kick off the next 2 3/4 days.
Well, first of all, congratulations on all being together. I know, Scott, you've pulled together a very big meeting. You're to be congratulated for that. I think that's spring is in the air. I think this is a blossoming of medtech's awakening after the pandemic. I think there's a lot of reason to be hopeful. I think the strategics are very active, by the way. They're all coming out of course, their own year-over-year comps. They generally have a lot of capital. I think the general growth model hasn't changed, which is to say most corporations invest the vast majority of their growth capital internally on developing their existing franchises, and most of their new growth comes from acquired platforms. I think that's going to continue to be the case. I expect that to be quite busy and healthy. I think the IPO market is a wonderful counterbalance to strategic intent. And I think strategic BD and venture groups are aware that public market access to capital is hot and represents a legitimate alternative. And as a result of that, if they want to buy a company before it gets to be too expensive, they may need to be moving earlier. So I think that is a trend that we'll likely continue to see as the IPO market remains open for medtech. So I'm very optimistic. I actually think the industry has fared quite well despite the overall economic downturn associated with the pandemic. I think there are going to be recovery dynamics in place throughout the rest of 2021, and I'm signing up for another 10 years, despite my advanced age.
Well, we're all glad to hear that. We'd love to keep you around. With that, everyone, let's give it up for Paul for taking time out of his day.
Thank you.
Paul,
thank you, Scott.
Thank you for helping us to kick off this meeting. I think, it's a special one, and you really helped it get started on the right foot, so thank you for your time. We'll let you get back to your day.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you next year for sure, hopefully sooner.
Look forward to it.
All right, thank you.
Take care.